So the other option that you guys have for your color wheel, color shape, your color schemes. The other option that you guys have for color schemes are watercolor paints. Now the watercolor paints that you've probably used in the past would be the little dishes with the little dried paint in it, and you add water to it and then paint that on. But what I have for you guys are like real watercolor paints. Okay, they're tube paints. So these are going to be just a little bit different. They are a little bit more sophisticated. You guys are a little bit older. You can test these out and see what they're like. There's not really a set, like one is better than the other. You can still make great artwork with those simple watercolor things. But I just think not a lot of people have tried the tube paints, so we're going to work with those this year if you want. So what I've done is the watercolor trays will already be there and they'll already have paint in them. They'll have the whole rainbow, and you'll just need to pull out the colors that you need for your color scheme. But I want to point out, should you need to refill your tray, that when we get the watercolor paints, you open the tube, there's not very much paint. Are we okay? There's not very much paint in these spaces. Keep in mind these are watercolor paints, so we actually use more water than we use color. So we don't need a whole lot from the tube in our paper. The biggest difference between the watercolor paint and the colored pencils, the watercolor pencils, is that if you were mixing colors with the watercolor pencil, you mixed them on the paper. So I colored orange and then I colored yellow over it. With the watercolor paints, you'll actually mix your color here on the tray and then paint from the tray into your space. So let me show you how that works. So I got a little bit of water on my paintbrush. With the watercolor pencils, I wiped the water off. With the watercolor paint, I don't want to. I'm going to wipe the water off inside my paint tray. So once I get a little bit of water in there, then I pull out my pigment. And now I can use it directly on my paper. So the colors that I have now are a cool color scheme. And you'll notice that when I'm painting, the purple that I have on my paper isn't as dark as the purple that's here in the tray. And that has to do with the amount of pigment in the water. So if I want this darker, I'm just going to go back and pull more pigment and go over top of it again to darken it up. Now I could wait for this to dry as well and go over it again, and it will darken that way too. Or you just get more pigment and less water. If you want a stronger color, you want more pigment and less water. Got it. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing with the watercolors as I did with the colored pencils, in that I don't want the same color to touch any of the two same spaces, and I want to change the color every time I cross a line. So you do need to do a little bit of planning. I can't mark it out quite the same as I can with the watercolor pencils. I can sort of plan it out. I could write really lightly with a colored or with a regular pencil that maybe I want this blue and maybe I want this blue-green and then I want this green. But if you have those letters there, they're going to show through when you paint over them. So if you do mark it out so that you know where everything's going, you will want to go back and erase those before you paint over them. Okay, so if I'm going to mix my colors, so let's say I'm going to color in this blue-green, this is the part that's different than the colored pencils. I'm not going to mix my colors on the paper, I'm going to mix them in the tray. So I'm going to decide which blue and which green I want because I have multiple colors of those. I'm going to add in my water to the blue, add in my water to the green, mix in my pigment, and then I'm going to pull the paint out here into my tray. Now, key point, before I go to touch the green, I'm going to wash out my brush because otherwise I'm going to put blue in the green space, and I don't want to do that because other people are going to use these trays. But here's the green. I'm going to pull the green down. And now that I have my two colors in the tray, I'm going to mix them together. So here I have a nice pretty turquoise color. If I want it more blue, rinse off my brush, pull in more blue. If I want it more green, wash my brush, pull in more green. Once I have it the color that I want it, then I'm going to go ahead and use it directly on my paper. So I am going to erase this little mark where I had what color I wanted. And then I'm going to add it on here. And again, if I want it darker, I can go over it a second time. If it was too dark, if you wanted it lighter, you just add a little bit of water to your paper. I don't have a great example of that, but that's okay. And just like the color pencils, the watercolor pencils, I don't want to paint two spaces next to each other and have them both be wet, or I risk bleeding. And the watercolor paints are going to bleed more than the watercolor pencils. But just like with the watercolor pencils, if it does bleed, get a dry paper towel, dab it, and then I can repaint these two spaces. So I'll probably use this one first. And then when this space is dry, I can go back and add in the blue. Okay? Then when we're done for the day, to clean out our trays, we're going to leave all these top colors because they're nice and they're still usable. But we'll clean out the spaces that we've pulled color in. So I can get either a sponge or a wet paper towel, and I'll clean out this space before I put my tray back so the next person can use the tray. And then